does general MBA teach you enough to be a good product manager?
I would say you don't necessarily need an MBA to be a good product manager, because if you're a senior PM, principal PM, you could be making, say, over 1 crore, 1.5 crores. I've seen people making that. The talent density is really, really high, especially at Microsoft. It's extremely high. You meet exceptional people.
How does a day in your life look like right now as a PM at Microsoft? Is it like that when we see in vlogs, you go at 9:30, you have a big buffet of brunch to eat, and then you go to gym? Okay guys, we are back with another episode of My First Job. This is our 6th episode, and in our 6th episode we have Soham Sen. Soham Sen works as a product manager at Microsoft. He has done his MBA from IIM Calcutta. We spoke in depth about how jobs, career and personalities all correlate, and the differences between the role of product manager and the role of a consultant. We drew a lot of parallels and similarity in both of these roles. We also spoke in depth about AI and how that will shape up the careers in the future. Also, if you are an aspiring PM, make sure to sit with a pen and paper because this episode has value wisdom for you. Soham, thank you for inviting us to your place.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, awesome. So, okay, for our audience, why don't you tell who Soham is and what he does?
So Soham Sen is a half Bengali, half Gujarati kid born and brought up in Calcutta. An Arsenal fan, big reader, currently a Microsoft PM, and on my way to another job in between jobs. Love to read a lot of books and mentor people, run a GDPI program with some friends, and also help out a couple of people with PM stuff, preparation for that. And currently trying to learn a little bit sort of different things, which is why I'm changing jobs, and happy to be here. I wrote this blog. It's called An Adventure of Discovery, and it was about the time of my life between deciding to take the CAT and then taking the CAT and getting through to my MBA. That phrasing covers a lot of things, an adventure of discovery, because I feel like it's been a lot of different things, knowing people, understanding myself, understanding situations, and then moving on from them. Whether you talk about discovering people, the friends, or knowing your family, knowing who you are, because as I said, being half Bengali, half Gujarati, brought up in Calcutta, is an identity confusion that goes on. What are you, who are you, where do you come from, and there is a certain desire to know that, and you end up chasing a lot of ideas down a lot of black holes sometimes, and sometimes you discover things, sometimes you don't, but you often learn a lot, and I think that's been the case throughout my my life.
So when you say about you should know yourself better, how much do you think is one's choice of career a reflection of their personality? Can they work at a designation or at a job role which their personality is not inclined to, probably?
People do end up in areas which sort of favor the sort of personality that they have. You will have really high mark people at jobs that need, get things done. Like, they'll do whatever it needs to get things done. Like, they'll stretch, they'll convince people, they'll maybe if they have to bend the rules a little bit, maybe they'll do that. So there are jobs like that, and there are jobs where people who don't want to do that will be better able and suited. So there is a spectrum, and there are various parameters where there are spectrums on each of those parameters. Maybe there's a spectrum on agreeableness. What job will you like if you're very agreeable, if you're not? Maybe there are jobs on, how intellectually satisfied you are solving puzzles, say, or how much of an appetite you have for a certain sort of work. So there'll be, reflections of that everywhere. But I feel like, especially in India, the start of your career is probably not the place where you will see that a lot, because it's like you end up somewhere and then you think, oh, what next? Like, a lot of people in engineering are there because nobody told them any better, or that they were really good at math and stuff, and they're like, okay, here. But maybe their personality is not bound by that set where they are in. Like, society might say, oh, you're just an engineer, why not? But there are several people who are in every single engineering class who are like superbly talented musicians, writers. You see, there are a lot of people who are like very multivariate in their skills and talents, and their personality is also a reflection of that. But where they begin to discover what their personality is happens to be a place which is bounded in some ways by the sort of jobs that it has. So if you're in, say, economics, because maybe your elder brother or your elder sister said this is a good thing and your parents were like, okay, then you are there, and then the jobs that are available in that field are the only spectrum that you see. So initially you will be in that spectrum, whether your personality fits it or not. Eventually, talent will out and you will do what you want. But probably there is a phase before, you know who you are, you know your personality, and you see where you will be a better fit. And then you go try and find something in that direction. If you're an entrepreneurial person, maybe you say, okay, I don't want to work for anybody else. I'll just do this thing. And then even as an entrepreneur, maybe if you are working in a certain domain, then you'll try and do something in that domain before you see, okay, is this domain really for me? And then maybe you'll do something else. So I think very few people are really lucky that they end up in the careers that they are suited for personality-wise from the beginning.
Right.
But eventually, I think either your personality ends up becoming that of the career you choose, or you are so dissatisfied by the career and personality mismatch that you end up leaving and doing something else. So it's sort of a dichotomy. It depends on the answer. Do you think personality can change? If it can, then maybe it goes either ways. People go and become the sort of personalities that are needed for the jobs. Say if the job pays really, really well, or the job is in a city where you have to be, you will mold yourself to survive in that environment, personality-wise as well. But otherwise, if you think personality can never change, then maybe you can make the argument that people will end up in some place where their personality is a better fit. They will not mold themselves to their environment. They will move out. Their dissatisfaction will rise. But I think more than personality, it's an effect of the people around you. So if you are in any company, you might say that this job, this profession, this thing is good for this personality. But what really matters is the people very, very closely working with you. Because those are the personalities that you interact with on a daily basis. And those are the people that you really care about. So, for example, Microsoft people think is one company. But I would argue it's more like 1,000 different companies within one conglomerate. You can think of it as like, the TAS or the Tata Sons of the tech world. Because there's so many different products, so many different spaces. Some of those spaces, people are probably working 16 hours a day. Some of those places, people are working 8 hours a day. So it's not that you can say that, oh, you're a product manager at Microsoft, you must have this personality, or this personality, if you have, then this is the place for you. Because it depends on the team. And I think if your team is of a certain personality and you're a fit there, then you will last there longer term. Whereas if you're not, then you will leave,
Was it your story as well when you started off as an engineer at Infosys?
It was my story in the sense that, I tried to think that is this what I want, but that's one of the disadvantages of being not so focused during the JEE prep is you land up somewhere where you might not have wanted to, or if you had a choice, you might. So I was in a private engineering college, and there sort of the limitations are a little bit more than you would say maybe IIT KGP or one of the older NITs. There maybe you meet a lot more multivariate people because I often find talent is multivariate. Like someone really talented in this one thing will also have some other thing that they're really crazy about, they're really cool at that thing. If they're really serious about something, they're also really serious about something else. The same analogy from the interview idea that, if you're serious about this, you'll be serious about this. That same thing plays out in terms of talent and seeking out new experiences and opportunities as well. So at my undergrad, we had this newspaper group. We had this college newspaper. It was founded by one of my seniors, Shoradip Sarkar. He was someone who really brought to life a lot of ideas for everyone, and they were like, okay, you can do this. He had gone to work at TCS, and then he later we saw him going for an MBA, and I thought that was a timeline to follow in some sense, because I was trying to make sure that I do justice to his thing while being managing editor, senior 4th year of the paper, and continued down that path. And therefore he was at TCS. I thought, okay, take an IT job and then see what you want to do. You're already an engineer, and I was not a computer science guy. I had studied electrical engineering, but you don't really want to go into a core job from that sort of place, because that core job will literally be a workshop somewhere or a factory floor somewhere, and you're really not cut out for that. Most of us are not. So then you go into what you get, and that was Infosys. I was really grateful to get in there. They came to campus, and they also have the philosophy that, okay, if you're good enough at something, we'll probably train you to become good enough at what we need. And so they have a test, and you make it through. If you make it through, you have an interview, a really smooth interview, really nice, calm gentleman on the other side. And that's why I made it through Infosys. And then dissatisfaction of various sorts, whether with the opportunities that I had then, or the monetary outlook. Being at Infosys, they don't really pay a lot. So because of that, I started preparing. Also because my girlfriend was preparing for the CAT, and Shorodipda had prepared for the CAT, and he'd gone to MDI. And I was like, okay, maybe this is something that I can do. I looked at the syllabus. Okay, this is something I can do. And so it's a series of events which are essentially accidents, but culminating in this thing where I think I'm a good fit, because product management at a big tech company was like, you need to be a bit of a nerd. So I was, rooting my Android phone back in 2010.
Oh.
My Samsung, I think, forgot the name, but you root it, and in the process of doing that, you have to find out a lot of stuff, and it was cool. And I was lucky to have a computer early on from class 3, 4 at home. So found a lot of stuff there. And because I read a lot, I'm happy to read a lot. As a PM, you have to read a lot in some places. You talk a lot to customers. I'm happy to do that. So it's really a set of coincidences, set of accidents that have come together for my career. But luckily it's worked out in the way that I enjoy this. I know this is something I want to do. I want to be around people, because just in tech, I feel you learn a lot from the people around you. Someone around you will know something about, say, diet. Someone will know a lot about travel. Someone will know a lot about books. You meet all sorts of people. The talent density is really, really high. Especially at Microsoft, it's extremely high. You meet exceptional people. And not everybody, but I would say a large part of Microsoft is very, very high, multivariate, and therefore you meet them, you learn from them. So it's worked out that way, and then I figured that maybe this is what I want to do. So I'm continuing down that path to be a PM and be around tech in some way. Maybe someday be a founder, or maybe a VC. I don't know, but this is a space that I think is the right space for me to hang out. And all of the accidents that have made me be here today are lucky, I would say.
So I'm 2 questions for you. So how does a day in your life look like right now as a PM at Microsoft? Is it like that when we see in vlogs, you go at 9:30, have a big buffet of brunch to eat, and then you go to gym? Or how is the day in your life like? And what are some core skills you picked up from MBA? Because you did a general MBA, if I'm not wrong, from IIM Calcutta, right? Yeah. So does general MBA teach you enough to be a good product manager, to pick up the right skills to be a good product manager?
Yeah, so I feel like I would say you don't necessarily need an MBA to be a good product manager, because a lot of my colleagues who I work with in Redmond in the US, they don't really have MBAs. So I wouldn't say that it's a prerequisite. There are people who've done BA philosophy, but maybe they've done it from Harvard. So I don't know if they took a CS course in the middle. I'm not sure of that. But they've done a BA. Some people have done, statistics, mathematics. A lot of people outside, I see it's not necessary. So I think it's more the function of our population, and the fact that, if you have a job and, nobody's willing to do it, anybody who comes up and says, hey, can I do it? You're going to let them. Like, you're going to say, okay, have a shot. But for us, in many domains, what happens is there are so many people willing to do it, that then the questions become a little bit different. Like, oh, have you done something like this before? Or how do I know that you will be good at this? Nobody's willing to just give you a chance, right? So the more you go up this ladder, the more credentialism becomes, valid, and becomes like a construct that is very real in the environment. So I think PM in India, in the big tech space at least, is one of those places where you're not really asking, hey, can you do this job? You're asking, how do I know for sure that you can do this job? You might be able to do it, but I'm not really sure, and I have to be sure, and therefore credentialism comes into the game. And then you need a certain background, you need an MBA, you need to have some sort of experience working in technology. Going back to the question, if you have nobody willing to do it, Anybody who comes in and says will be, valued. So if you are at a startup where, the pay that you're offering for a PM, no PM with an MBA is willing to do that, then the PM position there will be named product analyst and some undergraduate will do that. And that's just supply and demand and economics of talent. What will also happen is eventually if that company grows big enough, MBAs will start to come in because they're like, okay, now you pay enough, now you're prestigious enough, now you're doing work which is shiny and it's on my CV. In fact, the sort of places where people do break in later, you might see that someone there is not an MBA, right? They don't have an MBA, but they're maybe a vice president of product or they're a principal product manager because they came early. They came when it was uncool, they came when it was underpaid, and then they rose through the ranks. So I feel like that's a different perspective and a different way to break into PM. And another place where you don't have to have this path is within big tech companies. If you're an engineer, there are often a lot of places where you can say, hey, you know what, I want to be a PM. The Microsoft is one such place. For example, you can say, I've done a lot of this engineering thing, I'm bored, I think I'd be a great PM, I'm learning from this person, I want to shadow them. You can have a conversation with your manager and you can say, can I, transition to PM? And if there is a spot, and if you're good enough, if the team is of that nature where they can take a technical PM, they don't have to be a very business focused PM, or they don't really need to know a lot of whatever an MBA would know, they can just help you. And I've seen that happen. Some of the teams that I worked in, there have been people who've transitioned from engineering to PM within Microsoft. And I think that's a great option. People at big tech companies also have, which is a more conventional, let's say. It's not as unconventional as going to a startup, being low paid and being an accident of fate. Right. This can be more targeted and this can be more engineered. So there is that. I feel like depending on where you want to go, an MBA may or may not be necessary. Because what is your daily driver as a PM, what your schedule looks like and what the things you do look like, they often don't have a direct correlation to what you're taught in the MBA. Like, it's not necessary that you're using macroeconomics or you're using, say, PVC ideas in Microsoft. Like, you don't need them. But what does happen is the sort of crowd that gets into a B school, they're probably really good at talking to people. They're probably really good at balancing a lot of different ideas. They're probably good under pressure. So these things happen to be really good proxies for what will make a good PM. And when you add to that someone with a tech background, that adds another proxy, which is a very strong proxy. If you don't have an understanding of technology at all, you will probably struggle to have the same vocabulary as your engineers and other people in the company. And without that vocabulary, you're speaking Greek and Latin in the land of Hindi, let's say. So you need someone who can speak the same vocabulary, and therefore it becomes a really good set of filters, tech background, someone from MBA. And that MBA is really a proxy for a lot of other things which are unsaid. You could have them without an MBA, but it's a surer thing. If you're from a top MBA, you probably have these things down pat. And it's easier for the recruiter to say, hey, this guy is a good hire.
I don't want to hire somebody who can get me fired.
Yeah. Day to day, I think it really depends on what team you're in. And I know I might say this a lot in the interview. It's a really annoying PM habit to say it depends to everything. But it really does depend, because if you're on a team which is very, very technology focused, like my flatmate in Hyderabad, Karthik, he works in Azure. And if you're in Azure, you're really, really focused on a small niche within which you have to build a lot of skill. So I think he spent like 6 months just learning about virtual machines and the technology stack and how things work, which teams are working on what parts. So a lot of your day there is just learning, reading, watching, making notes. Whereas someone else who was, say, me in a project which was around gaming experiences on Windows, that project was a lot about understanding what customers want. So we went out and did a lot of research. We were plumbing the depths of Reddit to see what people are saying, talking to real gamers, both in India and abroad, all parts of the world. What are you doing with your Windows gaming PC? What do you use it for? What do you want it? How can we enhance your experience there? So during that phase, it was a lot of customer conversations, a lot of whiteboarding with designers, thinking up ideas, talking to engineers, seeing what's possible.
If I compare a product manager to a consultant, what would you say the similarities and differences in the roles and responsibilities that they handle? Is it safe to say that PMs work on long-term projects and consultants, they work on stints? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's fair because you might think that a PM is sort of an internal consultant if you want to look at it that way, and longer term projects, yes, because their remuneration, their growth, etc., is tied to how they perform, and how they perform. If there is an internal track record within the company, it probably matters more that they perform well in the longer term rather than the short term. Whereas a consultant, they care maybe more about what their partner thinks than what the client thinks, because the outcomes of the client don't impinge as much on the partner as they would internally. Like if my manager, not my manager, let's say my VP really cares about something and I do that for them, it succeeds and fails and they see it either way. Whereas for a consultant, if the project is done, if they have a high rating, whether the recommendation really pans out in the real world, not really something that ties back to what their boss thinks of them. Whereas for a PM, that would be really matter how my boss thinks of me. If it's a big success, they'll think well of me. If it's not, they'll think, okay, he did his best, but maybe something went wrong. Whereas for a consultant, I think it's a little bit higher level, because management consulting is different, implementation consulting is different. So if you're talking about a management consultant, they probably leave it at a higher level and then someone else figures out the implementation. And maybe that's also why it's interesting. Like you look at a slightly higher level of a thing and you generalize and you abstract, and then leave it to other people to figure it out. For an implementation consultant, maybe it's closer role to a product manager, because if you're, say, working with PwC to implement something, there is someone there who has a role maybe called product owner, and they're figuring out requirements and they're doing some things. So their role is also similar, but their incentives are different. Their incentives to make the client happy, and maybe the client being happy is dependent on some things, but not necessarily on the product being great. And they're working for the client and not the customer. Whereas in a product company, you have to at some point care about the customer, because if they don't care about your product, then long term you lose out. Whereas if you're an implementation consultant, you do the thing for 1 year, 2 years, and probably then you're off. Then it's a company responsibility, right?
If we look at this as a long-term career, what is the career growth like in product management? And eventually, let's just say after a lucrative career, what can be some good exit opportunities that people you have seen take?
So people have all sorts of outcomes from PM. I think one of the most common outcomes is you become an entrepreneur. If you have an idea and you've seen how products get built and you have a sort of a lust to stay in that environment, you like that environment, you like those people, you've built a network over a long period, people know you, that you build good products, that you build good teams, and then maybe they're more willing to fund you. So entrepreneur is definitely an exit option that I think I myself at some point should aspire to, I want to aspire to. Another is venture capital. If you're in product, you've had some experience in technology, you've been an engineer, you have an MBA, you worked at large tech companies, some small companies, then you see how do we make sure that this company which we're funding is going to do well. So the VC world is really good for that as well. In the West, a lot of PMs turn to VCs, and in Microsoft as well, one of my really good friends has switched in the past 1 year from Microsoft to a venture capital firm. And it has that archetype, engineer, then I'm Ahmedabad, Microsoft, VC. So that is an exit option as well.
How much can a PM in a good company earn, and how are their monetary incentive aligned to how well the product performs? Like at a junior level, I'm sure you won't have that incentive opportunity as much as you would have in a senior level, I'm assuming. But let's just say if you go to senior level also, what are some of the incentives that you unlock or if the product performs really successfully?
Right. So large tech companies in the last couple of decades have pioneered this process of sharing stock with people. So your incentives are aligned and you want the company to do well, so you do well on your product. Of course, your product alone might not decide the fate of the stock, but some do. Like someone in Azure really matters whether they are doing well for the stock to do well. Some in Windows, market share is a big deal, etc., etc. So they tend to pay a lot more in stock as a percentage of your total income as you go up the ladder. So at the end of the ladder, maybe 50% or more of your income might be linked to stock. And therefore, as you go higher and higher on the ladder, you sort of become more careful about the company doing well. And therefore, the alignment comes from there. At the lower levels, you still have stock. Even at my level, you have a certain amount of stock and you can increase your compensation through that. what happens is it sort of varies between different companies. So at large tech companies, you have stock. At very early stage startups, you also have stock, but that stock might not be worth a lot because it's just paper money at that point. Unless you get a secondary exit or someone buys them out, you will not have an outcome. But we've seen the evolution of this sort of compensation even in India. For example, Flipkart, a great company, has done a lot of secondary exits for its employees at regular intervals. I think every 1.5 years they've had a secondary exit since the sale to Walmart. So they continue to do that. So people tend to look for that outcome. If you're at a startup, people try and look at what sort of equity opportunity can I have, because that will be very meaningful equity as a percentage of the total.
Right.
In Microsoft, if I own 1%, I'm probably, I'm off the grid. I'm living in a cabin somewhere
Right.
with my estate. But in an early stage startup, if you're the founding PM, maybe you have 0.5%, 1% equity. Some places you see have that. And apart from that, I think there is a significant difference in what companies pay. And there is an overlap in ranges also. So for a startup who might not be paying any significant stock to very junior employees, they might start at a range way below the total compensation opportunity of, say, Microsoft. They might start, say, 15 lakhs as a PM at a startup or an APM at a startup, and goes up a very long way. So if it's a very well compensated opportunity, say the company has just made a ton of money, or they've raised a ton of money, then the compensation goes up. So you can double it in a timeline which would not be possible in a very hierarchical structure. Wow. Because going from APM to PM, if you're a really good PM, if you really matter to the company at a startup, you could double it or you could treble it in, say, 4 or 5 years. But at a large tech company, the compensation growth happens more at promotions rather than other places, because promotions unlock both the growth in your stock range as well as your base hikes are more at promos than at annual raises. Say Microsoft PM2 may be earning the same thing which a senior PM would be earning at a startup, because they don't have the compensation in stock and they might not be having as much leeway in compensation either. So say a PM2 could be earning 50 lakhs, 40 lakhs, 60 lakhs, the very big range. A senior PM could be at the same range across a ton of different startups. And if you're a senior PM, principal PM, you could be making, say, over 1 crore, 1.5 crores. I've seen people making that. But that's more likely to happen at large tech companies, because the number of principal PMs at a smaller tech company will be very small. Whereas at a Microsoft, I think there are lots of principal PMs relative to the market opportunity. Right. So you have those. And at that level, I think maybe more than half of your money you're making from stock. And therefore people tend to think of it in those terms at that range when they're skipping to startups, because no startup is paying that much money in cash. And then it sort of comes down to your, your motivation, what exactly you want to do, whether you want to work in a big tech company, small tech company, depends on the product, the people, a lot of other factors. So then people probably at that level, I think people start thinking about other things. You become self-sufficient at a certain point.
And since you deal with technology and you are required to have an understanding of how it functions across the board, how do you see the AI boom that is happening right now in the world probably shaping up a PM's job in the future?
So I think it's a really interesting time to be a PM, because a lot of what you might have taken maybe an hour to do, you can get done in 10 minutes, because of that hour, getting started, like when the scratch pad is empty, getting started is like half an hour or 40 minutes, and the rest of it is just iteration. So 0 to 1 journeys of getting started on any thought, any idea, any marketing pitch, any framework for thinking about a problem, a customer research questionnaire, all of these things have been really brought down in terms of time investment needed, because you can get started and the ChatGPT or Claude or Grok or any of these other large language model endpoints will give you something on which you can iterate. So the 0 to 1 journey for getting started has been really cut down. So it's a fantastic time to be a PM in that way. On the other hand, it sometimes seems like these things can do a lot of your job. So it feels a little bit dangerous as well. But having used large language models as much as I have in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, I have personally gotten over that fear a little bit, because particularly in this job, it's a really messy job. Like I said, a lot of ambiguity and a lot of talking to people, a lot of figuring things out. So unless everything else gets automated, this will not get automated. Plus, there's a very, very famous research paper talking about whether LLMs are really stochastic parrots. And a lot of people really hate this term in the AI world because they just think it's sort of demeaning to large language models to say that they're not really thinking or they're not really doing anything. But that's sort of true. Like my sense is they are really stochastic parrots in that they are probability generators. They're just calculating probability of what appears next and giving that. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's so easy to buy into the idea that they are more than that. But for a PM, like I said, it's really powerful to have these things to begin with. Your job becomes easy. You can do a better job in the same time. Instead of starting from scratch and spending half an hour doing nothing, thinking, you can start from something and spend 1 hour iterating, and therefore you get a better outcome.
On an ending note, do you have any piece of advice that you want to leave our viewers with, young working professionals entering the workforce in 2024 and beyond?
So I think a couple of things which I've learned in the past, I would say 4 years of working and college, a couple of years, that try to be really playing long-term games and be playing long-term games with long-term people. Because like I was saying throughout, if you look at things in a very short-term outlook, there will be certain decisions that make more sense versus you look at them with a slightly more longer-term outlook, certain things will make more sense. Like say the GDPI thing, monetizing it is a short-term. This is something I'm still trying to learn myself. I know a lot of people who are much better at it, and they back themselves to a degree where it becomes very clear that they're not comparing anybody to themselves or themselves with anybody in any short term. They are really, really looking, what can I do 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line. I know some people like that, and their sort of self-confidence and their ability to look longer term and not worry about it sort of inspires me. So I think playing long-term games with these sort of long-term people is absolutely key.
Okay, Soham, thank you for doing this on a Monday afternoon. It was really great talking to you. I'm sure our audience will pick up a lot of values and insights from this particular episode.
Thank you for having me, and look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Okay guys, if you liked today's episode, please share this with people who you think will find this interesting and valuable. Also, comment down below your favorite part. Also, if you want to add up to this conversation, please feel free to share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Also, do let us know which other guest from other field you would like us to feature next. Meanwhile, this is Saif from Team Inside IM signing off.